Welcome back to the Alliance Macco Show. All eyes are on Ottawa, by the way, for the big cabinet shuffle expected from the Trudeau government. When we get the details, you'll hear it live on CJAD. Now let's take a look at Canada's standard of living. And is our standard of living lagging behind other countries more and more? A new report out from TD shows this is the case, and this is something that's been on the decline for decades. Get a load of this. In 1967, Canada was the third richest country in the world, GDP per capita wise. Today, we're 15th. We're 15th. We were third in 67. Now we are 15th. It might be due to dropping worker productivity. That's one of the issues that's leading us to fall behind our peers. So let's talk about how we turn that around, if we should be as concerned as this TD report is, with Moshe Lander, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Concordia University. Moshe, welcome back. Oh, we just lost Moshe on the phone line, so we'll just take a few seconds here to get him back on the phone line. I think this issue is a really important one when we look at standard of living, because it is a metric, especially GDP per capita. That is how rich each and every one of us is. And if that number drops here and continues to drop in connection to our peers, that's not a good sign. And yesterday on the program, I brought up the case of looking at South Korea and Canada. In South Korea, they used to be behind us by a lot, and now we're sort of neck and neck. And some people would make the case that South Korea should join the G7 and Canada should be dropped from it. So let's talk about standard of living. Let's talk about this TD report. Moshe Lander, we got him back on the line. Moshe, thanks for coming on.
Hello.
I would love to know your thoughts on this TD report. It doesn't paint a pretty picture about standard of living. What say you?
It doesn't, and they're probably correct. I'll put the little proviso in before we get into the details that when we talk about standard of living, we're usually looking at things like GDP per person, right? So how much stuff we produce and then divide it by the population. Things like sunshine, time with the family, leisure, that stuff doesn't show up in GDP. Mm-hmm. So as we get richer and we spend more time doing things we enjoy that doesn't show up in the numbers, we could say that our standard of living is very, very high because we get to have these things. But in general, I agree with the report. We are falling behind, however you want to measure standard of living, and it's not pretty.
So what you just said there, right? Measuring the happiness of being in the park and time spent with family. Is it like, I see a lot of people that say, forget about GDP per capita. That's a 100-year-old metric we should throw out the window, and we should actually focus on time spent with the family instead. That should be our new metric. What do you say to people who make those arguments?
You're completely correct, and macroeconomists, for the most part, will agree with you, too. The problem that we have is we throw up our hands and say, all right, so how do we measure that stuff, right? So, a lot of economic measurements are based on things where you can pull out a ruler or you can add things up and you can quantify things. Those sorts of things don't work. And, I point out to my students somewhat jokingly that there's this idea of gross national happiness, right? That we could just go around to everybody and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Add it all up, divide by the number of people, and say, all right, this is the average happiness level. And if it's going up, then standard of living is rising. And if it's going down, then it's falling. But, of course, there, too, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But, is it any better than trying to measure up how many widgets you're making and combine it with the number of cars you're making?
But can I ask you, can't you have both? Can't you look at the GDP per capita and the happiness and say, hey, there are countries that are doing both much better than we are?
You can. And so, when we see this TD report, they do tend to focus on one particular measurement or a limited number. But macroeconomics does have more than just GDP, right? We don't, just teach GDP and say, all right, you know everything about macro, now get out of here. There are lots of other ways to measure how an economy is doing. And so it's in those finely grained details that we see kind of a bigger picture. But you can have as many different measurements as you want. The idea is that can we compare those across borders? Europeans have a culture of taking much longer vacations. So is it for that reason that their GDP is lower, or is it because they value leisure over labor, and so that sort of valuation gives them a higher standard of living? And how do we assign those measurements? But again, it's the devil in the details. But the broader picture is that I think for almost 30 years now, I've been saying our standard of living is slipping, and we are falling behind the Americans. Where we were maybe neck and neck with them, it does appear that we do seem to be falling behind, however you want to measure it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, and I keep hearing stories from tech workers. Some of them leave the United States, they come to Canada, and then they realize the standard of living isn't as high, and they go back to the U.S. Let's just take it from this angle, Moshe. This drop, we were third, now we're 15th in the world. Third in 1967. Wow, third of all countries. Why the drop? Does it come down to decisions made in Ottawa?
Ottawa and the provincial capitals as well. And so I'm not going to pin this on Canada being a high tax regime, but it's the way that we view the trade-off between equity and efficiency. And there is a trade-off. You generally can't have all of both. You can have some of both, but depending on the mix that you want is going to probably dictate to some extent your standard of living. And so Canadians generally have focused on equity. And I'm not talking about gender equity, racial equity. I'm talking about economic equity. And so because we view taxation primarily as let's go get the rich and let's redistribute it to the poor, done too excessively, this can discourage innovation, risk-taking, research and development, and the type of things that generates wealth and high income. And so if what we're doing is rewarding people for being innovative by grabbing their wealth and redistributing it, while that is equitable, it does dull the incentive to be innovative in the first place. So you're right. You see, we've been talking for decades about the brain drain, right? Canada's best and brightest head for the U.S. because they have a little bit more focus on efficiency, which is you innovate, you get to keep what you got. But, of course, they have more inequity.
Yeah, and then you wonder this from the word inequity. Let's talk about another word that is part of this debate, productivity, and how big of a key our productivity is. So do we need to just work more? Is some of it on us?
So it's not necessarily work more, it's work better, right? That's what productivity is. So productivity doesn't necessarily mean you have to work 20-hour days and never see your family, right? It's just when you're working, you have to be more productive during that hour, 2 hours, 7 hours that you're working. So for some people, there's not a way to be more productive, right? So you have a certain number of hours for your show. You can only have a certain number of guests. There's no more productive. A symphony orchestra can only be so productive. You can't play Beethoven twice as fast as you otherwise would. But there's a lot of jobs where you can be more productive, where within that time period, you can squeeze it out or you can service more customers. And so, again, what's the advantage of being more productive? More productive means higher incomes. And with higher incomes, if what comes with it is not just higher taxes, it's always going to be higher taxes, but a greater proportion of that income is being extracted in taxes, then that's going to dull productivity. How many people have we heard say things like, I passed up on the promotion because it's going to involve more work and the extra money doesn't justify it, right? So they don't see there's a productivity gain here to having it. And so again, are we stunting it because people just don't want to give up that extra income with the extra responsibility?
Is there one thing, Moshe, we could do, governments could do to get us back in the right direction so we start climbing back up that list?
Well, again, it's rewarding being productive. It's rewarding being innovative. It's rewarding research and development. And unfortunately, in a lot of those cases, that reward is you get to keep more of what you get. And so I think we need to think about, are we really using the tax system for redistribution in the best way possible? And can we maybe scale that back a little bit and allow people to keep the fruits of their labors? If they're allowed to keep what they have, then you might find that all of a sudden people want to work a little bit harder or a little bit more. It boosts the GDP number, maybe not the happiness number, but I tend to think, too, that even the happiness number would go up if you get to keep more of what you put into it.
Moshe, great discussion. Really enjoyed talking to you about this. Thanks so much.
Anytime.
Moshe Lander is a senior lecturer in economics at Concordia University.